His Excellency Mr. Makonnen Anyazewal, Minister of Industry of Ethiopia, Mr. Erastus Mwencha, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union, distinguished representative of the African Development Bank, honorable ministers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to have the opportunity to welcome you to Addis Ababa and to the United Nations Conference Center. This is my first official engagement since I assumed duties as Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, and I'm glad that it is an opportunity to be with such a distinguished and eminent gathering. Although this is just its second edition, the Africa Trade Forum, which brings together different trade constituencies from around the continent, has become a key feature of the continental trade landscape. This is not surprising given the timeliness and relevance of its themes. It is particularly appropriate that this session is focusing attention on boosting intra-Africa trade and establishing the continental free trade area. Since the African Union Summit has devoted its 2 meetings in this year to a similar theme, it is vital for the African trade constituency and other stakeholders to meet in order to provide strategic guidance to the implementation process. It is equally important to use trade to upscale the current appreciable growth rate of 5.2% per annum achieved in the continent since the turn of the century. This meeting should, however, not be just about repeating what we already know about constraints to African trade, such as infrastructural deficiencies, inadequate payment arrangements, and high tariff and non-tariff barriers. Our purpose, rather, should be to contextualize the current situation with regard to the building of political expression of support for the continental trade agenda and mobilizing broad-based support for actualizing this vision. It would also be important, of course, to identify potential obstacles and determine the role of all constituencies in the continental trade agenda going forward. We will need to articulate and implement policies that enhance productive capacities, simplify trade logistics, and that enable the provision of trade-related infrastructure. It also means expanding access to trade financing and harnessing Africa's human resources. Indeed, we must demonstrate that Africa's current economic performance can be reinforced by diversification and is not merely attributable to a scramble for our resources. Africa, however, is not only about vulnerabilities. We have untapped resources from demographics, natural resources, and agriculture. Africa's youth population is its most valuable asset and holds great promise for our future. Similarly, Africa's population is increasingly urban, and the benefits of agglomeration, including increased domestic demand, will work in tandem with internal trade to boost the creation of regional value chains. Agriculture and natural resources are the starting point for regional value chains, and their proper management continues to be a priority for our member states. This is why the 8th African Development Forum, taking place here in Addis next month, is dedicated to the theme of governing and harnessing natural resources for Africa's development. There are doubts that it is possible to dramatically scale up intra-African trade, but then there is already evidence that this is beginning to happen. ECA research shows that Africa currently has a higher level of infrastructure development than what Mercosur in Latin America had when they started, and that up to 46% of goods currently traded between African countries are manufactured goods. Let me state in conclusion that ECA will continue to work closely with our partners, the African Union Commission and the African Development Bank, to realize the vision of an integrated continental market in the continent. We will be putting emphasis in supporting this process in the work program of the African Trade Policy Center, which has received general support from the governments of Canada and the UK. And we thank them and all other partners, including but not limited to the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and the Regional Economic Commission's Business Councils, who have contributed to organize this forum. Please accept my best wishes for a fruitful deliberations and a stimulating exchange of views amongst yourselves. Thank you.
Distinguished participants, when we met here last year, it was on the eve of the AU summit that was going to take place in January under the theme of boosting intra-African trade, which is also the theme for 2012. Your deliberations and recommendations were indeed a major input in that summit. And I'm happy to tell you that as part of the outcome of the summit, 3 historic decisions were taken. One is to establish the Continental Free Trade Area by 2017. 2, the summit also endorsed an action plan for boosting of intra-African trade. And that is what the Executive Secretary referred to in large measure of the elements contained in the action plan. And 3, the summit also approved the architecture to support the implementation of the decisions as well as provide a framework for monitoring and evaluation. And I want to underline this particular aspect of monitoring and evaluation to see your meeting here as one that will set targets, but also a mechanism to ensure that we have a monitoring and evaluation mechanism in place. Ladies and gentlemen, the convening of the Second African Trade Forum and the issues lined for discussions are both timely and relevant. The forum will discuss ways of enhancing productive capacities and the improvement of industrial performance in Africa. It will also look at ways of enhancing trade facilitation, infrastructure for trade, and finance for trade. The forum will also discuss issues around the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area. In discussing these issues, the forum is expected to provide inputs in the development of the implementation strategy of the action plan for boosting intra-African trade and establishing the Continental Free Trade Area. Through this annual African Trade Forum, it is important for progress to be reviewed by stakeholders jointly so that the agenda remains transparent and visible. Indeed, all these issues are very important in boosting intra-African trade, but nothing will change for the better in Africa if we do not implement the agreed decisions. Every one of us has an important role to play in the successful implementation of the summit decisions. The private sector, including small traders, and the informal sector, and the women in business, the civil society organizations, the regional economic communities, and national governments all have to play their part if Africa is to trade its way out of poverty.
We have to review the factors that influence our ability to increase and realize the opportunity for inter-Africa trade and development. Africa needs to pursue comprehensively, since it is not really issue of trade for the trade's sake, but it is issue of development. And so we have to deal comprehensively with all the issues if we have to deliver results. So the boosting inter-Africa trade and continental free trade area decisions, which our head of state has made decision last January, gives us really this comprehensive approach. And therefore, we have to deal those things simultaneously, and complementary actions need to be taken. Let me remind ourselves, I think, the critical ones, which the distinguished speakers before me has also referred to them. The issue of productive capacity is still critical. We need to add value. It's a question of adding value to our raw materials, to our natural resources. We are simply shipping our agricultural crops, mining products. We don't add value. Why do others take? They take from us the raw materials, they add value, and sell it back to us at higher price. So we really need to change this if we have to have effective trade to serve as our development practice. So aggressive implementation of our infrastructure still is relevant. If there is anything that affects our competitiveness, even to trade among ourselves, is the issue of trade and logistics. This area we can very easily reform, coordinate, harmonize our customs, transits. And there are a number of good I think, practices already in the continent, which we can learn lessons to scale up to all of our countries. If we have to develop our productive capacity, if we have to invest in infrastructure and manage effectively the infrastructure that we have put in place, the issue of human resource development, it becomes important. For growth development to be sustained, we need for technology, transfer, innovation, which will help us to sustain our growth and development and trade. The issue of human resource becomes still as relevant as ever. Then there are institutions that we need to, institutions, market that supports market, that supports trade, need to be there. And finally, there is one important aspect which ties all these things together, is the issue of mobilizing resources, finance. Without finance, I think we could not be able to implement even if we have good programs, good projects, we can't implement. So we have to mobilize domestic resources. That's the only sure guarantee that we'll be able to run our programs. Excellencies, if you see all of this, the integral of all these important pillars, if you like, is about development, increasing our productive capacity, investing in our human resource, investing in our infrastructure, institutions. All of this combined is about development. So when we talk about trade, it should serve this development. So it's a question of accelerating our development, our growth. When we accelerate our development, accelerate our growth, trade will facilitate, contribute to sustainability of growth and development.
For us at the African Development Bank, the business of accelerating continental integration is at the heart of our activities. And in this regard, supporting regional integration is key. And in the ADF, African Development Fund envelopes, we have carved out dedicated resources to help African countries enhance regional integration. This is not only done through financing physical infrastructure, whether to boost connectivity and interconnectivity, but equally importantly, support to soft aspects of infrastructure, including trade facilitation, such as support for one-stop border posts and efforts to enhance the quantum of trade finance facilities that are available to African entrepreneurs as well as African countries. These are very important because, as you will agree with me, the continent still lags behind in terms of competitiveness. The recent publication of the Global Doing Business and Global Competitiveness report shows that as much as progress continues to be made by African countries, we still need to do a lot more in terms of improving our enabling environment to foster competitiveness and regional integration. This is important because as we are increasingly in a globalized world, challenged with access to markets in our traditional markets in Europe, we need to promote and enhance intra-African trade, which is still lagging. So we are very much aligned to the objective of this trade forum, and I look forward to a very productive exchange with you as to particularly how we can accelerate and sharpen the various initiatives that have been put in place